The happy family. The Miller house stood on the edge of a quiet town, wrapped in ivy and sunlight. Its windows gleamed, its garden bloomed, and on most mornings, the sound of laughter spilled out into the street. Daniel Miller was not a wealthy man, nor was he the sort who drew envy from his neighbors. But he carried a warmth about him, a gentleness that softened his features and made him easy to love. He had married Eliza 10 years before, and together they had built not riches, but a life. That life filled their home with 3 children. Ethan, the eldest at 9, was sharp and curious, always asking questions that stretched beyond his years. He adored books and often sat on the porch with his nose buried in one, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Sarah, at 7, was a whirlwind of energy, her mother's laughter spilling through her smile. She was bold, forever running barefoot through the garden, returning with scraped knees and handfuls of wildflowers. Jacob, the youngest at 5, was the heart of the family. He clung to his siblings, his chubby hands reaching for theirs when they crossed the street, his wide eyes filled with innocence untouched by the world. Eliza, their mother, was the soul that held them together. She had a kindness that seemed inexhaustible, even on the hardest days. Her presence filled the rooms with light, her voice calmed storms, and her smile erased Daniel's weariness after long days of work. Daniel cherished her. He cherished them all. When he came home from the workshop where he spent his days repairing furniture and mending old wood, the sight of his children rushing to greet him was his greatest treasure. Ethan would wave from the porch, Sarah would throw herself at his legs, and Jacob would squeal until Daniel lifted him into his arms. Their life was not extraordinary. Their meals were simple, their vacations small, their home modest. But it was happiness, pure and unpretentious. One Sunday morning, the sun poured through the curtains in golden rays, and the smell of Eliza's cooking drifted through the house. Pancakes and honey, fresh fruit, and warm bread sat waiting on the table. "Papa!" Jacob called from the stairs, his tiny feet pattering across the floor. "Come. Mama says we can eat now." Daniel chuckled, setting down the newspaper. "I'm coming, little bear. Did you help your mama today?" Jacob nodded fiercely, crumbs of flour still clinging to his shirt. "I mixed the bowl. Sarah spilled the sugar, but I mixed it." Sarah's voice rang out from the kitchen, indignant. "I didn't spill it." Jacob knocked my elbow. "Children." Eliza's gentle laugh floated from the stove. "Enough of that. Come wash your hands." Daniel stepped into the kitchen, kissed Eliza's cheek, and watched as she brushed flour from her apron. "Smells wonderful," he said softly. "It will taste better if you sit before the children devour it all," she teased, her eyes sparkling. At the table, Ethan was already arranging his fruit in neat patterns. Sarah bounced in her chair, and Jacob waved a sticky spoon. Daniel sat at the head, Eliza beside him, and together they clasped hands to say grace. It was moments like these, ordinary, fleeting, that Daniel held closest. Evenings by the fire. When the day was done and the sky outside deepened into twilight, the Millers gathered by the fireplace. Ethan would read aloud from his favorite stories, knights and kingdoms, quests and triumphs, while Sarah acted out scenes with exaggerated flair. Jacob, often too tired to keep his eyes open, would curl against Eliza's lap, drifting to sleep as her hand stroked his hair. Daniel would watch them, heart swelling with gratitude. "Papa," Ethan said one evening, lowering his book. "Will we always be together?" "Always, even when we're old." Daniel smiled, his gaze sweeping over them all. "Always," he said firmly. "Nothing will ever take us apart." Eliza's eyes lingered on him for a long moment, and her hand found his. There was something unspoken in her touch, something that seemed to cling to the edges of her soul. Daniel thought little of it then. The shadow waiting. Life, in its cruel way, does not announce when happiness will fracture. At that time, Daniel could not have imagined the shadows that would one day creep into their home. He could not have pictured a future where his children's laughter fell silent, where Eliza's warm presence was nothing but memory, and where his own hands would become instruments of betrayal. On those bright mornings and gentle nights, he believed in forever. He believed love could weather any storm. And for now, the Miller family remained whole, bound by laughter, bound by love, and oblivious to the fate that waited quietly, patiently, just beyond the horizon. The death of the mother. The Miller house was not built for grief. Its walls had been steeped in laughter, its windows glazed with sunlight, its air warmed by the smell of Eliza's cooking and the echoes of her voice. But death never asked permission before entering. It crept in quietly, like a thief, and when it left, it carried away the heart of the home. The first signs. Eliza had always been strong. She moved with the steady rhythm of a woman who bore 3 children with grace, who worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, who healed others with her smile. But then came the cough. At first, it was soft, dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Just a cold," she insisted when Daniel frowned. "It will pass." But it didn't pass. It deepened, rattling her chest, stealing her breath in the middle of the night. She grew pale, her once bright eyes dulled with fatigue. Daniel begged her to see the doctor. Finally, after days of fever, she relented. The diagnosis came with a cruelty neither of them had prepared for. An illness too advanced, too rooted to be undone. "We'll fight it," Daniel told her, gripping her hand with desperate resolve. "We'll fight it together." Eliza's smile was tired, wistful. "Sometimes battles are not meant to be won, Daniel." The children's innocence. For the children, life remained deceptively normal. Ethan noticed the medicine bottles piling on the kitchen counter, but he trusted his parents' reassurances. Sarah fetched water for her mother, proud of being helpful. Little Jacob, too young to understand, simply asked why Mama slept so much. Eliza hid her pain as best she could. She still tucked them in at night, still kissed their foreheads, still whispered promises of tomorrow. But each day, her voice grew weaker. One night, Sarah climbed into her bed and curled against her. "Mama, will you be better soon?" Eliza stroked her daughter's hair, her eyes glistening. "One day, my love. One day." But Daniel, standing in the doorway, knew the truth she dared not speak. The final evening. The night it happened, the sky was heavy with storm clouds. Rain tapped against the windows, the wind howled through the trees, and inside, Eliza's breath came shallow and strained. Daniel sat by her bedside, his hand clutching hers, as if sheer force could anchor her to life. "Promise me," she whispered. "Anything," he choked, tears spilling down his face. "Promise me you'll love them enough for both of us. Promise me you'll never let them feel alone." His throat tightened. "I promise, Eliza. I swear it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Her eyes drifted to where the children slept in the next room. Then, slowly, her hand went slack in his. The storm raged outside, but inside silence fell. A silence that Daniel would never escape. The children wake. Morning came with cruel brightness. Ethan was the first to notice something was wrong. He padded into his parents' room, his book clutched in his arms, eager to read to his mother. He froze in the doorway. His father sat slumped beside the bed, his face buried in his hands. "Papa." Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. "Why isn't Mama waking up?" Sarah appeared behind him, rubbing her eyes, and Jacob toddled in moments later, clutching his stuffed bear. Daniel lifted his head. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Mama. Mama has gone to heaven." Sarah blinked, confused. Jacob tilted his head. Only Ethan understood. His book slipped from his grasp, falling soundlessly to the floor. The children cried, their wails piercing the walls of the once happy home. Daniel gathered them in his arms, rocking them as his own sobs shook his body. Together, they mourned the woman who had been their light. The hollow home. The days that followed blurred into one another. Neighbors brought food, whispered condolences, and helped with the children. The house, once filled with Eliza's warmth, felt colder now, the air heavy with absence. Daniel moved like a shadow, doing his best to keep routines alive. He packed lunches, walked the children to school, and sat with them at night. But every task reminded him of her laughter in the kitchen, her hum while folding laundry, her soft hand brushing against his. The children clung to him, sensing his fragility even as he tried to be strong. Ethan became quieter, Sarah lashed out with sudden bursts of temper, and Jacob cried often for his mother. Daniel buried his grief to hold them together. But grief has a way of festering, and love denied can twist into something darker. The whisper of loneliness. Months passed. Daniel carried on, but loneliness gnawed at him. At night, when the children were asleep, he lay awake in the empty bed, haunted by Eliza's last words. He had promised her he would love the children enough for both of them. And he tried. He truly did. But the human heart is weak, and Daniel's would soon betray him. For though Eliza's death had left a void, fate was cruel enough to send someone willing to fill it. And with her arrival, the promise Daniel had sworn would begin to rot. The new woman. Winter melted into spring, and with it, the first hints of color returned to the world. Flowers pushed through the frost, children laughed in the streets again, and life in town carried on as though nothing had changed. But for Daniel, time had slowed. Each day felt heavier than the last, each night lonelier than the one before. It was during this season of hollow days and sleepless nights that she appeared. Their first meeting. Her name was Isabella Hayes. She arrived in town with the kind of presence that turned heads. She wasn't simply beautiful, though she was that, with her raven-dark hair and piercing green eyes. She carried herself with a confidence that suggested the world bent toward her desires. Daniel first saw her at the marketplace. He had gone to fetch bread for the children, his thoughts elsewhere, when he bumped into her near the stalls. A basket of apples tumbled from her hands. "Oh, forgive me," Daniel stammered, crouching quickly to gather the scattered fruit. Isabella bent down as well, her gaze flicking over him with a strange intensity. "It's quite all right. No harm done." When their eyes met, something stirred in Daniel, a jolt, sharp and unexpected, like fire catching on dry wood. It had been so long since he had looked into a woman's eyes and felt that ache, that longing. He returned her apples, fumbling slightly. "Here. I'm sorry again." Her lips curved into a small smile. "You look familiar. Are you not the man who repairs furniture on Willow Street?" "Yes," he said, surprised. "Daniel Miller." "I thought so. You did a fine job restoring Mrs. Carraway's table." "I'm Isabella." The name lingered in his mind long after she walked away. An unexpected comfort. Days passed, but Daniel saw her again. At the market, near the bakery, sometimes walking the same streets he did. Their conversations grew longer, slipping from polite small talk into something warmer. She had a way of speaking that drew him in, of making him feel seen in a way he hadn't since Eliza's death. Where neighbors offered pity, Isabella offered intrigue. She asked about his work, his childhood, even his thoughts on poetry and music. One evening, after delivering a repaired chair to a client, Daniel found her waiting on the street, as though by chance. "You look tired," she said softly, her eyes glinting in the lantern light. "Grief does that." Daniel froze, the words cutting through his defenses. "You've heard." "The whole town has," she replied, stepping closer. "I'm sorry for your loss. I can't imagine what it's like raising children alone." Something in her voice, sympathy yes, but touched with admiration, soothed the raw ache inside him. He found himself speaking more than he intended, confessing the weight of loneliness, the endless struggle to be both father and mother. She listened, truly listened, and when he finally fell silent, she laid a hand gently on his arm. "You're stronger than you know, Daniel, but you don't have to bear it all alone." That night, for the first time in months, he slept without dreaming of Eliza's last breath. The children notice. Ethan, Sarah, and Jacob soon noticed the change in their father. He smiled more often, his eyes no longer so heavy. At times, he even whistled again while fixing meals. "Papa seems happier," Sarah whispered one evening as she and Ethan watched him through the window, speaking with Isabella outside. Ethan frowned. At 9, he had inherited his mother's sharp intuition. Something about Isabella unsettled him. Her smile seemed too perfect, her gaze too lingering. "She's not Mama," Ethan muttered, crossing his arms. Jacob, clinging to Sarah's dress, asked innocently, "Is she going to live with us?" Sarah giggled. "Don't be silly. Papa would never." But her words trailed off as she saw the way Daniel looked at Isabella, a softness in his eyes she had thought belonged only to their mother. The web tightens. As weeks turned to months, Isabella wove herself deeper into Daniel's life. She visited his workshop, bringing him food, praising his skill. She walked with him in the evenings, her arm brushing against his, her laughter filling the spaces where silence had once suffocated him. For Daniel, she became light in his darkness. One evening, as they strolled beneath the blossoming trees, Daniel confessed, "When Eliza died, I thought my heart had died with her. But you, Isabella, you've made me feel alive again." She smiled, her eyes catching the moonlight. "You deserve happiness, Daniel. And I could give it to you. We could build something together." His heart raced. "Then marry me," he said without thinking, the words tumbling from his lips. For a moment, her smile widened, and then it faltered. "There's one problem," she said softly. "The condition." Daniel stopped in his tracks. "What problem?" Her gaze hardened, though her voice remained sweet. "The children." His breath caught. "The children? They're mine, Isabella. My blood. I love them." "I know," she said, placing a hand on his chest. "But I can't. I won't raise another woman's children. I've seen the way they look at me. Especially the eldest, Ethan, isn't it? He'll never accept me." "They're just children," Daniel protested. "They'll grow, they'll adjust." "No," Isabella interrupted, her tone firm now colder. Daniel, if I marry you, it must be without them. I want a life with you, not with your burdens. Her words struck like a knife. Daniel staggered back, his chest tightening. They're not burdens. They're all I have left of Eliza. Then perhaps, Isabella said, her green eyes glinting with something dangerous. You must choose. Them or me. She kissed his cheek lightly, as if to soften the blow, then walked away, leaving him trembling beneath the stars. A choice that should never be made. That night, Daniel sat at the kitchen table long after the children had gone to bed. The house was quiet, save for the faint creak of wood and the ticking of the clock. Ethan had left his book on the table, open to a story of knights protecting their kingdoms. Sarah's drawings lay scattered nearby, a sun with smiling faces beneath it. Jacob's little bear rested on a chair, waiting for morning play. Daniel stared at these things, his heart heavy with conflict. Isabella's face haunted him, her words burning like poison. Them or me. He had promised Eliza he would never let the children feel alone. He had sworn to love them enough for both of them. And yet, the pull of desire, of not wanting to live the rest of his years in loneliness, gnawed at him. Isabella was young, vibrant, intoxicating. She offered him a future, a chance to feel whole again. But only if he gave up his children. The first crack. The next morning, Daniel watched them eat breakfast. Ethan reading between bites, Sarah humming as she played with her food, Jacob giggling at nothing at all. Their innocence stabbed at him. He smiled, but inside his heart ached. Because for the first time, as he looked at them, he wondered, not how he could live without them, but how he could live with them and still have Isabella. It was the thought that marked the beginning of his fall. The temptation. The days that followed Isabella's ultimatum weighed on Daniel like an invisible chain. His mind was never still. By day, he worked with his hands, repairing tables and carving wood. Yet every stroke of his chisel carried the echo of her words. By night, when he tucked his children into bed, their small arms around his neck felt like a plea, a reminder of the promise he had made to their mother. But when sleep refused him, he saw Isabella's face. Her beauty, her laughter, her touch, it lured him as strongly as the tide pulls a drowning man beneath the waves. Them or me. The whisper of desire. Isabella did not vanish after delivering her demand. She came still, as though nothing had changed, her presence like a perfume that lingered long after she had gone. She visited his workshop, leaning against the doorway, watching him with eyes that undressed his resolve. You work too hard, she teased one afternoon, trailing her fingers along a finished table. All this effort, and for what? To feed 3 little mouths that will never thank you. Daniel frowned. They are my children. I need nothing in return. Her lips curved into a sly smile. But you need me. Don't deny it. His heart stuttered, shame mingling with longing. He hated the truth of it, yet he could not turn away. That evening, as he lay in bed, the house silent around him, he thought of her again, not her cold words, but her warmth, her promise of love. The loneliness that had clawed at him since Eliza's death grew sharper, more unbearable. And with it, temptation pressed deeper. Ethan's suspicions. Ethan was no fool. At 9 years old, he had inherited his mother's sharpness, and he noticed what his younger siblings did not. He saw the way his father's eyes followed Isabella, the way his jaw tightened whenever her name was mentioned. One night, after Sarah and Jacob had fallen asleep, Ethan whispered, "Papa, do you love her?" Daniel froze, taken aback by the bluntness of the question. Who? The woman with black hair. Isabella. Daniel swallowed, his throat dry. She is a friend. Ethan's gaze was piercing, too wise for his age. Mama wouldn't like her. The words struck him like a blow. That's enough, Daniel said sharply, though his voice trembled. He turned away, but guilt gnawed at him as Ethan's eyes lingered with quiet accusation. Isabella's pressure. Weeks turned to months. Isabella's visits grew longer, her words sharper, her demands less veiled. One evening, she came to his workshop carrying a bottle of wine. They shared it in the dim light, her laughter filling the space. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. Daniel, she whispered, her hand resting on his arm. I could give you the life you dream of. Nights without loneliness. Days with joy. You deserve that. His chest tightened. And the children? Her smile vanished. Still clinging to them? Daniel, open your eyes. They hold you back. They chain you to the past. You are young, strong. You could begin again. With me. I cannot abandon them, he said, voice breaking. She pulled away, her green eyes flashing. Then you cannot have me. Silence stretched between them, suffocating. At last, she stood, her dress swaying as she turned to leave. At the door, she paused. When you are ready to choose, she said coldly, you know where to find me. The father's turmoil. That night, Daniel sat in the kitchen, staring at the children's belongings scattered across the table. Ethan's book. Sarah's half-finished drawing of a house with a smiling family. Jacob's bear. He touched each of them, as though their small lives could anchor him back to sanity. But instead, he felt the weight of his own despair. He had promised Eliza. He had sworn to her. And yet, Eliza was gone. Isabella was here, alive, offering him warmth he craved with every aching bone in his body. Tears slid down his face as the thought crept in, black and poisonous. If not for them, I could be free. Sarah's innocence. The next morning, Sarah bounded into the kitchen, her hair in messy braids. Papa, will we ever have a new mama? She asked brightly, as though it were a simple curiosity. Daniel froze, his cup halfway to his lips. Why do you ask that? Because other children have one, she said, swinging her legs from the chair. And sometimes I pretend mama is still here, but she isn't. His heart cracked. He set the cup down, kneeling before her. Sarah, mama is always with you. In here. He touched her chest. She smiled softly. But a new mama could be nice, too. He tried to smile, but it felt like a lie. Because the only woman he wanted had made her conditions clear. The poisoned thought. That evening, after the children were asleep, Daniel sat alone by the fire. His hands shook as he poured himself a drink, the liquor burning down his throat. He thought of Isabella's words. They chain you to the past. He thought of Sarah's innocent question. Will we ever have a new mama? He thought of his own heart, raw with longing, breaking under the weight of grief and desire. And for the first time, the thought became more than just a whisper. He imagined the house without children. Quiet, peaceful, free. Isabella's laughter echoing through its halls, her touch waiting for him at night. The image sickened him, yet it also enticed him. He pressed his fists to his eyes, tears spilling through his fingers. God forgive me, he whispered. But even as he begged, the temptation rooted itself deeper, feeding on his weakness. The dream. That night, Daniel dreamed of Eliza. She stood in the garden, her dress white, her hair flowing. She held the children's hands, their faces glowing with innocence. Why are you here? He asked her. To remind you, she said gently. Of what? Of your promise. The children turned to him, their eyes wide. Ethan's voice, steady and sharp, cut through the dream. Don't let us go, Papa. He woke with a start, his body drenched in sweat. The room was dark, the children sleeping soundly down the hall. He pressed a hand to his chest, his heart pounding. But as dawn crept in, washing away the remnants of the dream, the poisonous thought returned. Stronger, clearer, Isabella's final word. The next time Daniel saw Isabella, she did not bother with charm. She met him in the woods, where no ears could overhear. Her arms folded, her gaze cool. I will not wait forever, she said. My life will not be wasted on a man too weak to make a choice. Isabella, please. No, her voice cut like a blade. Them or me. Decide. Soon. She turned and walked away, her figure fading between the trees, leaving Daniel trembling, hollow, and utterly lost. The breaking point. That night, Daniel prepared dinner. The children chatted at the table, their voices filling the house. But his hands shook as he stirred the pot, the smell of herbs and broth rising with the steam. He imagined slipping something else into it, something that would end the choice he could not bear to make. His heart thundered with terror at the thought, yet he could not silence it. Ethan's voice broke through, sharp and suspicious. Papa, are you all right? Daniel turned, forcing a smile. Yes, my boy. Yes, of course. But inside, he knew. He was nearing the edge of a cliff, and soon, there would be no turning back. The poison night. The sky was heavy that evening, smothered by low gray clouds. Thunder growled far in the distance, a warning that seemed to echo the storm already raging in Daniel's heart. The children played in the parlor, their laughter floating into the kitchen like cruel reminders of innocence. Daniel stood at the stove, wooden spoon in hand, staring into the pot of stew that bubbled slowly. The smell of rosemary and onions filled the air, comforting and familiar. It should have been a meal of love, a father feeding his children. But tonight, it was something else. The bottle. On the corner of the counter sat a small, dark glass vial. Its contents shimmered faintly, a powder he had obtained weeks earlier under the pretense of killing rats in the workshop. He had hidden it away, swearing to himself he would never touch it. But Isabella's words had gnawed at him every day since. Them or me. His hands trembled as he reached for it. His reflection swam in the polished steel of the kettle, a man he no longer recognized. Hollow-eyed, weak, desperate. It's only a thought, he told himself. You don't have to do it. Just see. But as he uncorked the vial, the scent of bitter almonds drifted up, sharp and unforgiving. The children's laughter. From the next room, Jacob's giggle rang out, high and sweet. Sarah was chasing him, her braids bouncing, while Ethan sat on the floor with his book, pretending not to watch but smiling faintly at their antics. "Papa!" Jacob shouted, his small voice filled with joy. "Is dinner ready? I'm hungry." Daniel's chest constricted. His hand hovered over the pot, the vial clutched tightly. His mind screamed at him, "Stop. They are your blood. Eliza's children. Your children." But another voice whispered, softer, darker. "Without them, you can be free. Without them, she will be yours." Ethan's warning. "Papa!" Ethan called, appearing suddenly in the doorway. His eyes, too old for his years, studied him with suspicion. "What's wrong?" Daniel startled, nearly dropping the vial. He shoved it behind a jar of flour, his heart pounding. "Nothing," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "Go play, Ethan. Dinner will be ready soon." Ethan didn't move. His gaze swept the counter, the pot, his father's trembling hands. Then, slowly, he nodded and returned to the parlor. But his silence was louder than any accusation. Daniel's knees weakened. He pressed his forehead against the cupboard, sweat dripping down his temple. I can't do this." And yet, when he looked at the vial again, he didn't put it away. The choice. He poured the powder into the pot. It dissolved instantly, swallowed by the stew. The bubbling continued as though nothing had changed, though Daniel's world had shifted into something monstrous. His hand shook so violently the spoon clattered to the floor. He sank to his knees, gasping, tears burning his eyes. "God forgive me," he whispered. "Forgive me." But there was no answer. Only the bubbling of poisoned stew and the innocent laughter of children who trusted him. The meal. The table was set. 3 bowls of stew steamed before the children, their faces bright with hunger. Sarah clasped her hands together. "Papa, can we say grace?" she asked. Daniel's throat closed. He nodded, bowing his head, though no prayer came from his lips. Sarah's sweet voice filled the silence, asking blessings on the food, on her papa, on her brothers. Daniel's hands shook so violently he spilled his drink across the table. "Papa!" Jacob blinked at him. "Eat," Daniel croaked. "Eat, children." They obeyed. Spoons clattered against bowls, small mouths filled with warm stew. Daniel watched with hollow eyes as Sarah smiled at him through the steam. "It's good, Papa. Thank you." The first signs. At first, nothing. Just the scrape of spoons and the hum of satisfied children. For a fleeting moment, Daniel thought, hoped, perhaps the poison hadn't worked. Perhaps it had been too little, or the stew had killed its potency. Then Ethan dropped his spoon. He clutched his stomach, his face twisting in pain. "Papa, something's wrong." Sarah whimpered, her hands trembling as her spoon fell. Jacob began to cry, his small body racked with spasms. "No!" Daniel shouted, springing to his feet. "No, no, no!" The children collapsed onto the floor, their cries piercing the air. Foam flecked their lips, their eyes wide with terror. "Papa!" Sarah screamed, her voice breaking. "It hurts." Ethan's gaze locked onto his father, betrayal burning through the agony. You did this." The deaths. It was over quickly. Too quickly. Their small bodies convulsed, then grew still. Ethan's hand stretched toward Daniel, trembling, before falling limp against the floorboards. Sarah's eyes, wide and glassy, stared at the ceiling as though still searching for comfort. Jacob's little bear slipped from his grasp, lying forgotten beside him. The house fell silent. Daniel dropped to his knees, his cries ripping through the air. He gathered them in his arms, rocking them, sobbing into their hair. "No, my babies, forgive me. I didn't mean." But their faces remained pale and lifeless, the warmth already leaving them. The arrest. The neighbors heard his screams. They rushed in, found the children's still forms, and Daniel clutching their bodies in madness. The stench of poison clung to the air, undeniable. It was the neighbor, Mr. Carraway, who restrained him, who pulled the children from his arms. Daniel fought like a beast, but his strength was nothing compared to his grief. By the time the constable arrived, Daniel was slumped in the corner, muttering over and over, "I didn't want this. I didn't want this." The constable looked at the bowls, the spilled stew, the lifeless children. He shook his head, grim and cold. "Daniel Miller, you are under arrest for the murder of your children." The final glimpse. As they dragged him from the house, Daniel looked back one last time. The table still set, the bowls half full, Ethan's book open on the chair, Sarah's drawing folded on the windowsill, Jacob's bear abandoned on the floor. A happy home, now nothing but a tomb. And outside, through the blur of his tears, Daniel thought he saw a figure in the distance, dark hair, green eyes, watching from the shadows. Isabella. She did not come to him. She did not speak. She only turned and walked away. The death of the mother. The Miller house was not built for grief. Its walls had been steeped in laughter, its windows glazed with sunlight, its air warmed by the smell of Eliza's cooking and the echoes of her voice. But death never asked permission before entering. It crept in quietly, like a thief, and when it left, it carried away the heart of the home. The first signs. Eliza had always been strong. She moved with the steady rhythm of a woman who bore 3 children with grace, who worked from dawn to dusk without complaint, who healed others with her smile. But then came the cough. At first, it was soft, dismissed with a wave of her hand. "Just a cold," she insisted when Daniel frowned. "It will pass." But it didn't pass. It deepened, rattling her chest, stealing her breath in the middle of the night. She grew pale, her once bright eyes dulled with fatigue. Daniel begged her to see the doctor. Finally, after days of fever, she relented. The diagnosis came with a cruelty neither of them had prepared for. An illness too advanced, too rooted to be undone. "We'll fight it," Daniel told her, gripping her hand with desperate resolve. "We'll fight it together." Eliza's smile was tired, wistful. "Sometimes battles are not meant to be won, Daniel." The children's innocence. For the children, life remained deceptively normal. Ethan noticed the medicine bottles piling on the kitchen counter, but he trusted his parents' reassurances. Sarah fetched water for her mother, proud of being helpful. Little Jacob, too young to understand, simply asked why Mama slept so much. Eliza hid her pain as best she could. She still tucked them in at night, still kissed their foreheads, still whispered promises of tomorrow. But each day, her voice grew weaker. One night, Sarah climbed into her bed and curled against her. "Mama, will you be better soon?" Eliza stroked her daughter's hair, her eyes glistening. "One day, my love. One day." But Daniel, standing in the doorway, knew the truth she dared not speak. The final evening. The night it happened, the sky was heavy with storm clouds. Rain tapped against the windows, the wind howled through the trees, and inside, Eliza's breath came shallow and strained. Daniel sat by her bedside, his hand clutching hers, as if sheer force could anchor her to life. "Promise me," she whispered. "Anything," he choked, tears spilling down his face. "Promise me you'll love them enough for both of us. Promise me you'll never let them feel alone." His throat tightened. "I promise, Eliza. I swear it." Her lips curved into a faint smile. Her eyes drifted to where the children slept in the next room. Then, slowly, her hand went slack in his. The storm raged outside, but inside silence fell. A silence that Daniel would never escape. The children wake. Morning came with cruel brightness. Ethan was the first to notice something was wrong. He padded into his parents' room, his book clutched in his arms, eager to read to his mother. He froze in the doorway. His father sat slumped beside the bed, his face buried in his hands. "Papa!" Ethan's voice was small, uncertain. "Why isn't Mama waking up?" Sarah appeared behind him, rubbing her eyes, and Jacob toddled in moments later, clutching his stuffed bear. Daniel lifted his head. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. "Mama. Mama has gone to heaven." Sarah blinked, confused. Jacob tilted his head. Only Ethan understood. His book slipped from his grasp, falling soundlessly to the floor. The children cried, their wails piercing the walls of the once happy home. Daniel gathered them in his arms, rocking them as his own sobs shook his body. Together, they mourned the woman who had been their light. The hollow home. The days that followed blurred into one another. Neighbors brought food, whispered condolences, and helped with the children. The house, once filled with Eliza's warmth, felt colder now, the air heavy with absence. Daniel moved like a shadow, doing his best to keep routines alive. He packed lunches, walked the children to school, and sat with them at night. But every task reminded him of her, her laughter in the kitchen, her hum while folding laundry, her soft hand brushing against his. The children clung to him, sensing his fragility even as he tried to be strong. Ethan became quieter, Sarah lashed out with sudden bursts of temper, and Jacob cried often for his mother. Daniel buried his grief to hold them together. But grief has a way of festering, and love denied can twist into something darker. The whisper of loneliness. Months passed. Daniel carried on, but loneliness gnawed at him. At night, when the children were asleep, he lay awake in the empty bed, haunted by Eliza's last words. He had promised her he would love the children enough for both of them. And he tried. He truly did. But the human heart is weak, and Daniel's would soon betray him. For though Eliza's death had left a void, fate was cruel enough to send someone willing to fill it. And with her arrival, the promise Daniel had sworn would begin to rot. The gallows. The morning of the execution dawned gray and merciless. A thick fog blanketed the town, curling through the cobbled streets, muffling the sounds of early vendors. Yet despite the gloom, the people gathered. By the courthouse green, a gallows had been raised, sturdy beams of oak, the rope swaying like a serpent eager to strike. The crowd pressed close, their faces grim, hungry for justice. Mothers held their children high to see the man who had murdered his own. Old men shook their heads, muttering curses. The square buzzed with anticipation. It was not merely a punishment, it was a cleansing, ritual to rid the town of Daniel Miller, the name that had become synonymous with betrayal. The prisoner. Daniel was led from his cell at dawn. His steps were heavy, but his face strangely calm. Chains clinked with each movement, but he offered no resistance. The guards flanked him, spears in hand, though they needn't have bothered. His eyes were hollow, fixed on something distant, perhaps the memory of Eliza, perhaps the laughter of his children. His lips moved soundlessly, whispering names, prayers, or confessions to ghosts no one else could hear. "Walk," barked one guard, shoving him forward. The noose awaited. The march. Through the streets they marched him, and the people jeered. Rotten fruit and stones flew from the crowd, splattering against his tattered clothes. Murderer. Child killer. Hang him slow. But Daniel did not look at them. He did not flinch when a stone cut his brow, blood trickling down. He carried his silence like a shroud. When they passed the bakery, the smell of bread wafted through the air. Once, he had bought sweet rolls there for Ethan's birthday. A knife twisted in his heart at the memory, sharper than any insult. The gallows. At last, the platform loomed ahead. The crowd surged forward, pressing against the ropes that kept them back. Children were hoisted onto shoulders, their eyes wide with a mixture of horror and fascination. The judge stood nearby, his expression stern. "Daniel Miller, you stand condemned. You are sentenced to death by hanging for the murder of your 3 children. Do you have any last words?" The square grew silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Daniel raised his head. His voice, though hoarse, carried across the hushed crowd. "I loved them." His eyes filled with tears. "God forgive me, I loved them. But I was weak. I let the devil whisper through a woman's mouth, and I listened. If there is mercy, let it be for their souls, not mine." The crowd erupted, some scoffing, others spitting, a few crossing themselves in uneasy pity. "Isabella." And then Daniel's eyes caught her. Standing at the edge of the crowd, cloaked in dark velvet, Isabella watched. Her green eyes gleamed, lips curled into the faintest smirk. No one else noticed her. She was just another figure among the masses. But to Daniel, she was brighter than the gallows itself, the architect of his ruin. Their gazes locked. She raised one hand slightly, as though in farewell. Not love, not sorrow, only triumph. Daniel's knees weakened. His heart clenched, yet a strange clarity washed over him. She had wanted this from the beginning. Not his love, not his children gone, his destruction, his death. And she had it. The rope. The executioner stepped forward, a burly man in a hood. He slipped the rough noose over Daniel's neck, tightening it until the coarse fibers bit into skin. Daniel closed his eyes. He saw Ethan's steady gaze, Sarah's gentle smile, Jacob's innocent laughter. He mouthed their names one last time. The executioner pulled the lever. The drop. The platform fell. Daniel's body jerked violently, the rope snapping taut. The crowd gasped, some cheering, others turning away. His legs kicked, his chest heaved, but the rope was merciless. His eyes rolled back, his face purpled. For long, agonizing moments, the town watched him writhe. The monster they hated was being undone before their eyes. And then finally he was still. The aftermath. The judge declared the sentence carried out. The crowd began to disperse, satisfied, whispering to each other of justice done. But there was no true satisfaction, only a heavy, grim silence that lingered over the square. A few mothers clutched their children closer, as if to remind themselves of what was at stake. A few men muttered that death was too kind for him. But Isabella lingered. When the crowd thinned, she approached the gallows, her steps slow, deliberate. She looked up at Daniel's lifeless body, swaying gently in the wind. Her lips curved into a smile. "Goodbye, Daniel." No one heard her but the crows, the whisper of revenge. As she turned and walked away, the truth shimmered like heat in the air. Daniel had thought himself the player of his fate, but he had been a piece on Isabella's board from the beginning. She had whispered. He had listened. And now, her revenge, whatever dark seed had birthed it, was complete. No one knew why she hated him. Perhaps even Daniel never truly understood. But it did not matter. She had wanted him broken, and he was. The town thought justice had been served. Only Isabella knew the deeper truth. This had never been about justice. It had been about power. And she had won. The echo of ghosts. The gallows remained for days. The wooden platform stood silent and grim on the courthouse green, the rope swaying gently in the autumn breeze like a reminder of human cruelty. Birds gathered there, perching on the beams, pecking at scraps left behind by the crowd. People passed quickly, some crossing themselves, others spitting to ward off evil. Daniel Miller's body was cut down and buried outside the cemetery wall. An unholy grave, denied the sanctity of consecrated ground. No stone marked the place, only bare earth, trampled by indifferent feet. He was not mourned, but whispers lingered. The town's unease. At night, strange sounds crept through the village. Mothers claimed to hear faint weeping carried on the wind. Farmers spoke of children's laughter echoing in the fields though no children played there. One night, the old baker swore he saw 3 small figures at his window. They pressed their hands against the glass, their eyes wide and dark. By the time he stumbled outside, they were gone. Rumors spread. The Miller children are not at rest. Isabella's disappearance. While the town trembled, Isabella vanished. After the execution, no one saw her again. Her house was found empty. No clothes in the wardrobe, no food in the cupboards. Her bed remained neatly made, untouched. She had slipped away in the night, like smoke dissolving in the wind. Some said she fled to escape suspicion. Others whispered darker things, that she had never been truly human, but a spirit of vengeance wearing a beautiful face. A witch, a temptress, a demon. But one thing was certain, her work was done. She had no reason to stay. The widow's sister. One evening, Eliza's sister, Margaret, came to town. She visited the graves of her niece and nephews, bringing flowers. She wept as she placed them on the soil, whispering prayers for their peace. When she learned what Daniel had done, her grief turned to fury. She sought out Isabella, demanding answers, but found only emptiness. She bewitched him, Margaret told the townsfolk, her eyes blazing with conviction. No man would do such a thing unless ensnared by evil. But even as she spoke, she knew there was no magic that could explain it all. Daniel had made his choice, and the children had paid. The haunting. Nights grew colder. The first snow dusted the rooftops, and with the snow came stronger whispers. Children woke screaming, saying they saw 3 pale faces at the foot of their beds. Dogs howled at unseen figures. Candles flickered and went out when the wind was still. One widow swore that as she walked past Daniel's grave, she heard the voice of a child whisper her name. And in the courthouse itself, where Daniel's trial had been held, the night watchman claimed he heard the sound of spoons clinking against bowls, followed by soft, choking cries. The town shuddered. The echo for Isabella. Far away, in another village, Isabella sat before a mirror. Her emerald eyes glowed in the candlelight, her lips painted in crimson. She smiled at her reflection. But then the smile faltered. Behind her in the glass, she saw them. 3 small figures, pale and silent. Ethan, Sarah, Jacob. Their eyes were not angry, not weeping, only a watching. Isabella turned, but the room was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, they were gone. For the first time in years, she felt a chill crawl down her spine. The true revenge. Daniel had thought he was killing his children for Isabella. But Isabella had known what he would do all along. Perhaps it was revenge for some forgotten slight. Perhaps she had always despised him. Yet fate has a way of twisting knives. Isabella may have destroyed him, but in doing so she had bound herself to the children's unfinished story. Their spirits lingered, not for their father, but for her. Everywhere she went, shadows followed. Small footsteps in the night. Laughter that faded into sobs. The sound of spoons tapping, bowls clinking, the Last Supper replayed again and again. The true revenge had only just begun. The town's legacy. Years passed, and the tale of Daniel Miller became legend. Parents told their children, never betray your blood. Never trust a smile too sharp or eyes too green. The gallows rotted, then fell. The graves grew mossy. But the whispers never ceased. Travelers spoke of strange sounds in the village at night, and some claimed to see 3 small shadows running between the trees. The name Isabella was never spoken aloud again. It became a curse, a warning, a ghost story. And for those who remembered, the lesson was clear. Revenge does not always end with death. Sometimes it lingers like a shadow, following those who believe they have triumphed. Isabella's undoing. Isabella had always believed herself untouchable. She had worn beauty as armor, wit as a dagger, and desire as her most dangerous snare. Daniel had been easy prey, weak, grieving, desperate for warmth. She had plucked at the strings of his heart until he snapped, and then she had watched him fall. But victory was a hollow thing. When she left the Miller town, she thought she left everything behind. The gallows, the whispers, the children's eyes. Yet no matter how far she traveled, they came with her. The first nightmares. In the inn where she lodged, Isabella dreamed of children's voices. At first, they were distant, laughter echoing down endless corridors, the kind of sound that might have once been sweet but now carried a coldness that tightened her chest. Then came the cries. Choked, ragged, gurgling cries. She woke with her heart pounding, sweat soaking her nightdress. The room was dark, but not silent. A faint scraping noise came from the corner. When she lit a candle, she saw 3 small bowls placed neatly on the floor. Inside each was a spoon, clinking gently as if stirred by unseen hands. The innkeeper swore no one had entered her chamber. The smell of poison. Days passed, but the torment did not. At every meal, Isabella tasted bitterness. Sweet bread burned her tongue with the acrid tang of poison. Wine soured the moment it touched her lips. Once at a tavern, she pushed her plate aside in frustration, only to see the faces of Ethan, Sarah, and Jacob reflected in the dark surface of her wine. Their eyes watched her, unblinking. She smashed the glass, but the vision lingered in her mind long after the shards were swept away. The shadows follow. Wherever she went, she felt them. In the marketplace, she turned corners and glimpsed the hem of a child's garment vanishing into the crowd. In the forests, she heard footsteps trailing her, too light to belong to any adult. At night, their whispers grew clearer. Why father? Why mother's friend? Why did you let him? Her hands shook. She no longer slept soundly. Her beauty dimmed, her eyes ringed with shadows. Men who once pursued her began to look at her uneasily, sensing something broken beneath the surface. The mirror. One evening, she stood before a mirror in a wealthy man's home, where she had been a guest for several weeks. She adjusted her gown, smoothed her hair, and forced a smile. But the reflection did not obey. Her own face vanished, and instead 3 pale, hollow-eyed children stared back. Their mouths opened, yet no sound came, only the clink of spoons, the rattle of choking breaths. Isabella screamed and struck the mirror with a candlestick, shattering it into 100 shards. The wealthy man sent her away at once, muttering of madness. The descent. Alone and wandering, Isabella sought priests and healers, begging for relief. Some offered holy water. Others offered charms. But none silenced the voices. The children followed. She began to see them even in daylight, sitting at the edge of fields, watching her from alleyways. They did not speak anymore. They only stared, waiting. Her once confident steps faltered. Her gowns grew tattered, her hair wild. She muttered to herself, pleading with shadows no one else could see. People avoided her on the roads, whispering that the beautiful stranger had gone mad. The final return. Years passed. Isabella drifted, rootless, until at last her wandering brought her back to the town she had fled. The gallows were gone, replaced by a fountain. Daniel's grave lay untended, a patch of weeds by the wall. But the Miller children's resting place was marked with flowers, left by strangers who remembered their innocence. Isabella stood there trembling. She dropped to her knees before their graves. "What do you want from me?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "He is gone. You had your vengeance. What more do you ask?" The wind stirred, carrying the faint sound of laughter. Ethan's deep chuckle, Sarah's soft giggle, Jacob's high, joyous squeal. For a moment, it was almost tender. Then it turned to choking gasps. The hanging tree. That night, Isabella wandered into the woods, drawn by something she could not resist. The moonlight bathed the path in silver, and the branches twisted like skeletal arms above her. She came upon a tree, gnarled, blackened, with a rope dangling from its limb. It was not the gallows of the courthouse, but it might as well have been. Her hands moved without her will, fingers tightening around the rope. She heard the children behind her, their voices rising in a single whisper. "Join him." Her knees buckled. Her breath came ragged. She looped the rope around her neck. For the first time, Isabella wept, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of her own triumph turned to curse. She stepped forward. The rope snapped tight. Silence. When the villagers found her body the next morning, they said it was the devil's work. Some claimed she had been possessed, others that she had been cursed by the souls of the children she had wronged. Her face, twisted in death, still bore a trace of beauty, but her eyes were wide, frozen in terror. No one buried her near consecrated ground. They left her body at the forest's edge, warning their children never to wander too close. The end of Isabella. But the children's laughter no longer echoed in the town. The whispers ceased. The bowls no longer clinked. Their spirits, it seemed, had found peace at last. And Isabella, once the weaver of ruin, had become the final victim of the web she spun. The legend lives on. Years passed. The gallows rotted into dust, the graveyard grew moss and ivy, and the faces of Daniel Miller, Eliza, and Isabella faded from living memory. Yet their story did not die. It survived in whispers, in firelit kitchens, in the hushed tones of mothers soothing restless children, in the warnings of fathers to sons tempted by folly. What had once been scandal became legend, reshaped by time into something darker, almost mythical. The tale told. By the hearth, an old woman would lean close to wide-eyed children. "There was a man named Daniel Miller," she'd begin, her voice low and gravelly. "He had a wife as kind as spring rain, and 3 children whose laughter filled their house. But after his wife's death, grief twisted him. He let a woman of wicked heart lure him. She whispered that his children stood in the way of his love. And one night he fed them poison. The children would gasp, clutching blankets. And did he escape? They'd ask. The old woman's eyes would narrow, gleaming in the firelight. No, the town hanged him. His body swung for all to see. But that was not the end. Here her voice would drop to a whisper. They say the children did not rest. Their laughter echoed in the fields. Their faces appeared in windows. And the woman who led him astray, the beauty with emerald eyes, she too could not escape. The children followed her until her mind broke, and she hung herself from a cursed tree. The children would shrink back, half terrified, half thrilled. And the story would linger in their dreams. The warning. For generations, the tale carried a warning. To men, it was a reminder not to betray their blood, nor let lust outweigh loyalty. To women, it was a lesson that beauty without heart leads only to ruin. To children, it was a comfort, that even in death, innocence could cry out for justice. The Miller story became a moral parable, reshaped to suit each tongue that told it. Some said Isabella was a witch who cursed Daniel. Others claimed she was a demon in disguise. A few whispered she had been nothing but a woman, cruel and calculating, and that was worse than sorcery. But in every version, the children's eyes lingered, unblinking, eternal. The haunting that never faded. Though years turned to decades, there were still those who swore the children's presence lingered. Farmers claimed to hear laughter drifting over the fields at dusk. Travelers walking the forest paths reported glimpsing pale figures darting between trees. At the cursed tree where Isabella had died, birds would not perch. Even in summer, no leaves grew on its twisted branches. The villagers avoided it, but children dared each other to touch its bark on moonlit nights. Some swore they felt cold fingers brush theirs. The town grew, changed, modernized, but the legend clung like ivy to stone. Margaret's vow. Eliza's sister, Margaret, lived long after the tragedy. She never stopped tending the children's graves, placing fresh flowers each spring. In her final years, she would sit by their resting place, telling them stories of their mother, whispering prayers. When she died, the town buried her beside them. And some said the children finally rested easier after she joined them, as though her presence comforted their spirits. The story spreads. Centuries later, scholars dug into the archives of the town. They found Daniel's trial records, the account of his confession, the execution order signed by the judge. They pieced together fragments of Isabella's existence, rumors, letters, hints of her vanishing. Books were written. Plays were staged. The Miller tragedy became folklore, passed from region to region, each retelling darker than the last. Some softened it, turning Isabella into a misunderstood woman. Others sharpened it, making her the embodiment of vengeance itself. Daniel, too, was reshaped, sometimes pitted, sometimes demonized. But always the children remained unchanged. Innocent betrayed, forever echoing in the story's heart. The cautionary echo. Even in modern times, parents still warn their children. Don't wander too far at night, or the Miller children will call your name. Be honest and loyal, for betrayal calls curses upon the soul. And when couples quarreled, older folk would shake their heads and mutter, "Better end it clean than follow the path of Daniel and Isabella." The echo of ghosts had become a part of life, stitched into the culture, shaping choices of those who never knew the real people behind the legend. The final image. On quiet nights, when the moonlight was sharp and the wind cut cold, some swore they still saw them. 3 small figures, hand in hand, walking along the old graveyard wall, their faces pale but calm, no longer weeping, no longer begging, just watching. And behind them, in the distance, a lone woman's shadow hanging from a twisted branch, swaying in the wind. A reminder that revenge, once loosed, never fades. It lingers, reshaping itself, whispering through generations. The Miller story had ended in blood and rope. But the legend lived on.